On Word TV via Facebook. Word Radio. Independent Black Media.
I could not do a show without including this song. I certainly wouldn't do it.
Good afternoon. You are listening to our special Founders Day broadcast on 900 AM, 96.1 FM, wordradio.com, the Word app, and on Word TV on Facebook Live and on our website. So I'm Sarah Lomax Reese. I'm really excited to be in the big chair. I'm not often in the studio hosting, but I'm really excited to be about to engage in a really powerful conversation with someone I have deep respect for, Roxanne Stafford, who's the managing director of the Night Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund. And Roxanne, are you there? All right.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
How are you?
I am feeling blessed. I'm feeling blessed because we have an opportunity on this Founders Day to really celebrate that spirit of Dr. Lomax. And I'm honored to be here in community with you, with everybody that's a part of his legacy. Because as we know, a legacy is powerful because we can all step into our authentic selves when we're united in that kind of vision that your dear father laid out for all of us.
Absolutely. That you said that so beautifully. And yeah, today is our annual Founders Day celebration. You were with us last year at the Free Library of Philadelphia when we were in person. And we did kind of a soft launch of Livelihood last year. But today is a whole nother kind of reimagining of our Livelihood initiative. And it really brings together so many elements of my father's life and legacy as someone who cared deeply about economic empowerment and economic self-determination and wealth creation for Black people. And he really embodied so much of that in his own life. As we've said throughout the day, he was a physician, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and of course the owner of WURD as the founder, and that's the name of the day. And so today I really am excited about talking with you about Livelihood, which, just to give folks an understanding of what the Livelihood Initiative is, it's a way for us to leverage all of our platforms at WURD, our radio platforms, our digital platforms, social media, website, events, all of those things that we do to reach the community and really try and leverage all of those platforms to connect Black Philadelphians with jobs, career readiness information, entrepreneurship opportunities, small business development resources, and financial literacy. And so, Roxanne, you, through your work at the Night Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund, have really gotten deeply invested in our Livelihood initiative. And the Night Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund gave us a grant to really try and build out Livelihood. And I wanted to ask you, as our partner in this effort, what spoke to you as our funder that made you really want to get behind this particular initiative that we at Word are unveiling?
Yeah, Sarah, first and foremost, thank you for couching this as a partnership. Because this is what it needs to be, again, modeled by your father, right? How to bring different people and approaches together. And I think for all of us involved, what we saw in Livelihood is that economic justice is connected to well-being, right? And when one is feeling centered and whole, one is able to give more to the larger community, right? So what we were attracted to is all the core principles that make up Word, right? And how you all have this great outward orientation, meaning that you see the economic self-determination and agency developed by an individual allows for that determination and agency to be built by a larger community. And what we're trying to do with our work in the Night Lenfest Fund, again, in partnership with the Knight Foundation, the Lenfest Institute for Journalism, and many others, is to figure out how might we create a more sustainable and equitable news and information ecosystem in service of communities being able to thrive. And so as you hear those words and how you earlier described livelihood, it was a perfect match, right? To really think about, especially at the local level, what would this look like when we are centering the community, when we are understanding that news and information and access to that leads to one's ability to figure out what your future should look like and be like, right? And not determined by outside influences, right? Mm-hmm. Or in spite of those influences, you have a way, right? And that's what livelihood is all about. It's making a way when maybe you don't see a way. It's understanding that universal prosperity, right? And that commitment to that is already rooted in the Black community. Yes. Now, what we've got to do in partnership, so thank you again for seeing us as partners, is figure out, how do we amplify that? How do we enrich that? What are the right touch points? How do we help individuals and organizations be able to do that at a level that doesn't sacrifice the self and well-being, right, in the long run, and allows us to have joy in that pursuit, even though we know that those obstacles are high and those barriers can be difficult to cross. But livelihood reminds us that it is the spirit of life that is in our neighborhoods, in our hearts, in our families, right? That is a part of that key process that leads to economic prosperity and universal prosperity as a whole.
Yes, absolutely. We're talking with Roxanne Stafford, and she's the managing director of the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund. And this is part of our Founders Day celebration, acknowledging the life and legacy of WURD radio founder Walter P. Lomax Jr., MD, my father. And one of the things that I think WURD really represents, and by extension, livelihood, is this this effort that my father really embodied in terms of doing good and doing well. And so we really, at WURD, we're very committed to looking at how we, as a media organization, an independently owned Black station, can really put the people at the center and at the forefront. So we're constantly trying to figure out what are some of the challenges that are facing our community that we as a media organization can address in a way that maybe other organizations can't. So we're an amplifier, but we're also a connector. And again, that is really, we were looking at the high poverty rates in Philadelphia. We were looking at the high unemployment rates in the Black community in Philadelphia. And we were saying to ourselves, like, what can we do that could actually have an impact, a positive impact? Philly is a city that is so rich in resources. There are a lot of programs. There's a lot of money in Philly. But for some reason, and a lot of us know what those reasons are, it does not always get connected up with the people who need it the most. And so we are trying to use this this very powerful media platform to be that bridge and be that connector through this livelihood initiative. And one of the things that we're going to do today is actually go live with our new livelihood website. And so we wanted to take this time to also kind of just unveil. It's at wordworks.com, WURDworks.com. Kayla's going to pull it up so we can take a look at it on, if you're watching us via WURD TV, you can just see this is our homepage, the livelihood homepage, and it features actual stories from Philadelphians who are looking for work or have businesses or are looking for financial resources for their small businesses. And it features a video that we did with Sincerely Sarita, who was just on earlier, about her struggles as an entrepreneur. And then we also have a job board. We have a job listing, if you just go up a little bit higher, Kayla, where we have different jobs, keep going, that for different organizations that are partnering with WURD as a way to amplify their message and connect our audience with jobs that are available to them and through those organizations. And so we're also trying to be a connector with organizations that are trying to recruit talent in the city through diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and things like that. And so it's a multimedia enterprise with audio, video, and stories, real live stories of individuals. But most importantly, we're trying to connect people up with jobs and resources and information that exist. And so thank you, Kayla, for kind of screening. She was my Vanna White, kind of showcasing what's happening. And that's just like a glimpse. But I really want to encourage our listeners and our viewers to check out WURDWORKS.com, wordworks.com, and check out our livelihood site and give us some feedback, because obviously we're always a work in progress, but all of this is really about benefiting the whole Philly ecosystem, and the media ecosystem is something that I think is really important. Again, with the Lenfest Institute and now the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund, it's very much about the Philadelphia media ecosystem and making sure that there is an expansive, vibrant ecosystem. And so I want you, Roxanne, to talk about the role that you see that independent Black media and just media that is owned and operated by people of color. Where does that fit into your vision and your view of a vibrant media ecosystem?
Yeah, this time period presents so much change, often pain, but tremendous possibility. And I think a lot of times we're hearing people use the words of, we need to create more safe spaces to be able to figure this out. I would say we need more brave spaces to do this work, and independent Black media that is led by people of color. We have always been about those brave spaces, right? Independent Black media allows us to not only talk about issues, but really understand the connection between joy and struggle. I think oftentimes when other forms of media are trying to look at issues that directly impact communities of color, the struggle is always overemphasized without understanding the joy, the creativity that is a part of the lived experience. And since we are, to your point, Sarah, like figuring out what is this thriving, effective ecosystem now that we are in this new reality, we need to now more than ever walk hand in hand and explore together, along with independent Black media led by folks of color, media coming from people of different abilities, right, to help us understand this critical period of time, again, of reimagination and reinvention. And so the work that we are trying to do, again, to use your words, in partnership and true collaboration, is to explore that, because we know independent Black media led by communities of color, have the leading voice when it comes to practicing these new forms of business models and engagement. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing you on the Paley Center panel, helping to break that down last week. As other forms of media, and particularly journalism, is struggling to figure out trust building and engagement, we know that in independent Black media, again, we know within the walls of Word Radio and your activities in the community, that this type of work of engagement is central. It isn't an afterthought.
Well, I want to talk about this issue of trust, because we know also there have been a lot of examples recently in the aftermath of the kind of, let's call it, the racial reckoning that's starting to happen around the country and some parts of the globe, that lots of media is kind of stumbling. Lots of white-led media has been really called out, and leadership has fallen, and lots of things, whether it's WAMU in Washington or WNYC, or even the Inquirer got tripped up when their Buildings Matter Too headline. There have been a lot of examples of mainstream media organizations that have been called out around the lack of diversity, the lack of cultural competence, and I'm curious, like, as we look at this particular moment in time when so much is being challenged around race and gender and power structures, how do you see the disruption happening that will actually make long-standing change in the media world, both empowering Black and Brown owned and led organizations, but also making sure that the white-led organizations are accountable to the constituents, diverse constituents that they serve?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned both. I think sometimes we over-index and say that only white-led, quote unquote, traditional mainstream media organizations are the solution. We have to do this in partnership with independent, POC-led, in particular Black and Indigenous-led, in order for this to be lasting. Moving to a movement as opposed to thinking about this as a moment requires, first and foremost, for journalism to face this reckoning and understand that it has had a history of perpetuating racism, and in particular anti-Black racism. And so what that means is that this is more than just saying we should hire certain folks. This is actually re-examining the workflows and processes that lead us to deciding what is a story, who gets to be a source, what are the platforms that we use, right? And what you might notice with some of the words that I'm choosing is those types of questions are questions that are often asked in innovation circles, right? In terms of sustainable business models or which technologies we should incorporate. And the reason why I'm asking those questions, there is a parallel, is it comes back to a fundamental understanding, right? That equity is innovation, right? And that if we truly, again, and this is all industries, but I know today we're just focusing on journalism, right? If we truly center the populations that we are working with, and centering doesn't mean I'm observing and looking down on you. It means that we are walking hand in hand to ask each other these questions and answer these questions together. Then we're going to be able to start a process where the work evolves, right? That allows us to do not just the right thing, but do the smart, sustainable business thing and figure out, like, it's more than just saying, are we using TikTok because we want Gen Z, but really figure out what is the role of news and information when we are faced at a time where every system is changing. We need everyone to be participating in that, right? And again, that is more than just, I'm not saying we shouldn't. We have to hire, retain, and have people in the right positions. But if we're doing the same activities over and over again, right, that don't allow true agency, don't allow the creativity, the expression, the intellect, the thoughtfulness that comes from our diverse communities, those efforts more often are in vain, or those efforts lead to personal sacrifices, right? And again, back to your point, we're talking about a continuation of movement, right? Contributing, news organizations, media organizations, contributing to a legacy of justice and equity, a legacy like your father demonstrated to all of us why we're having this conversation. You know, you've got to elevate this into talking also about how we do the work and the why around the work, just as much as who is doing the work.
Absolutely. That's Roxanne Stafford. She is the managing director of the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund. I am Sarah Lomax-Reese, the president and CEO of WURD, and we're having this conversation for multiple purposes. One is to acknowledge WURD's existence and acknowledge the legacy of my father, Walter P. Lomax Jr., MD, as the founder of WURD, and having the insight and the wisdom to know that the Black community in Philadelphia, this very Black, very dynamic city, deserved to have a place where we could speak and be heard in our own voice, and the enduring legacy of that decision that has unfolded over the last 18 years in the growth of WURD. And we're also talking about the importance of independent Black media. We're talking about the importance of using these platforms to really identify gaps and try and fill them like we are trying to do with our livelihood initiative that is designed to use our platforms to connect Black Philadelphians to job opportunities, entrepreneurship resources, small business development resources, financial literacy, and just to try and really affect a change in the city around the high poverty rates and the high unemployment rates in a tangible way, or at least to do our part to address those issues. And so one of the things that I've often said, Roxanne, is that it's really difficult. It's maybe a little bit easier because of the moment that we're in, but it has been incredibly difficult to make a sustainable business model really work within the context of being an authentically speaking truth to power Black independent media outlet. Because there is this new wave of recognition around systemic racism, which obviously we've been talking about forever, and Black people have known it forever, but there's this new kind of awareness of it, and that is actually providing some additional opportunities for us, and we're grateful for that. However, we have been starved, really, as a Black-owned media outlet for the first, I would say, 17 and a half years of our existence, because there was a presumption that our outlet was not as good as, and it was not as relevant as, primarily because we serve the Black community specifically and authentically. And that translated into not getting, I believe, the level of support that I believe we deserved from the corporate community, from a lot of the stakeholders around the city. And so I want you to talk about, because I know that sustainable business models is an important part of the work that you all are doing with Night Lenfest. What are, in your view, the critical components for sustainable media organizations, particularly if we're talking about independent, like smaller, independent, Black and Brown owned, led media organizations?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So we'll see which ones we hit today, and maybe we can continue to talk about this in another forum. I think first and foremost, that recognition that there are barriers around a perception that there is a lack of quality is something that needs to be addressed and recognized. And I'm not saying that directed to independent Black and other POC-led organizations. I'm directing that to folks that have access to those resources. They need to interrogate themselves and ask, why is there an assumption that there is a lack of quality, when in fact we know and have many examples, right, that what happens when POCs lead, in particular, interact with forms of technology like Twitter, right, we have these amazing effects that lead to different types of adoption, right? So when we're talking about creating sustainable business models, we have to have also an orientation of what does the future look like and who can best help us figure that future out. Again, I'm addressing like other funders, other investors, right? Other folks with resources, right? This reckoning moment has changed the way you do business, right? So you need to start looking at others who have figured out new ways to do business even before the pandemic. Now, when I start to think about community-based media, independent media that's led by communities of color, just led by other folks that are often not thought of, a lot of times what we need to do, because I come from that tradition as well, is start to think about what are other spaces that we can showcase our work and demonstrate our value, and not always stick to the quote unquote industry that we're supposed to belong in, right? So if we can demonstrate our value outside of traditional media, like connecting it with what's going on with public health and how best to reach people, right? If we can show as I mentioned earlier with Twitter, to technology companies, right? The ways in which we amplify, the ways in which we reinvent and are creative with their platforms, allows them to do their own R&D at lightning speed. That's another way to show and add value. But I would also say there is no one answer to this. And I think sometimes we hear time and time again, and I'm talking to folks who have run their organization for decades, to also folks that are just starting up, is that please spend time exploring, just like you all have at Word and have integrated many of these pieces, multiple business models that will lead to that sustainability. So again, like you all have done, like figure out what uniquely it means to be a member, right? Which is another way of saying subscriber. And what is that value add? What is that experience that nobody would get if they didn't have a window into the Word community, right? Mm-hmm. What does that look like as you extend it to, and although we know it is dwindling, it's still present, the relationships that you have with advertisers? That should still be a segment and part of your work. And in fact, a lot of times what we're seeing is within the most effective ways of being sustainable is that the relationship with advertisers moves more into a sponsorship where you recognize that there is value add when you all work together around a common goal. Right? And again, I know you all are doing that a lot at Word.
Well, I would say, I sit on a lot of these, journalism panels, mm-hmm. and I really, I believe that advertising, the demise of advertising, I know it's hit legacy print publications really, really hard, but I know for us, advertising is still a very critical part of our revenue mix. And so I feel like, for independent Black media, we need to double down on all possible revenue streams, whether it's membership, advertising, sponsorships, whatever those, and then non-traditional revenue streams. There are lots of ways that we are trying to innovate, and one of the newest streams for us as a commercial radio station, a for-profit radio station, is reaching out to the philanthropic community and getting grants that are helping us. And I have to say, and I'm very grateful to Knight Lenfest and to the Lenfest Institute and to the Knight Foundation and to the Borealis Foundation and to the Solutions Journalism Network and all of the folks who have really taken a chance, really, in funding a for-profit radio station that's doing community-based work that has a very important and authentic mission. And that has been a game changer for us because it has allowed us to go from, status quo and just kind of like barely hanging on to a growth mode. And I think that is in large part, I think, the advocacy of some of the Black women that I know who are in leadership positions in some of these journalism philanthropic organizations and others, not just Black women, but you and some others have been incredible champions for independent Black media, and I'm really grateful for that because that really can be the difference maker between surviving and actually thriving. And that's the mode that I want to step into, and we are stepping into through Word and through this livelihood initiative and with the support of organizations like the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund and others.
So thank you, Sarah. And you're exactly right. It's the portfolio approach to revenue generation and sustainability that allows you to get to that point where you can start to be that much more creative. And philanthropy, just like journalism, right, is also going through a process of reckoning and understanding the systems that have predicated its behavior and changes that need to be made. And so like you, I am thankful for many, in particular, Black women, but there are also many others who are in the larger field of philanthropy that are making those shifts. So back to my earlier point of encouraging folks to interrogate themselves about why there are certain assumptions, like you mentioned before, a lack of quality, right? That there is a growing group of folks in philanthropy that are actively doing that work across the board, not just for journalism and media, but for other systems. Because if we don't do this now, when, right? Because we are at a precipice of so much that we could either soar to where we need to be, right? Like that vision that your dad laid out for all of us that we're celebrating today, right? Or we can be not only in a sense of dire straits, we could lose the greatness that we know is inside of all of us, and in particular, the greatness that we know are in all of our children and youth.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That is Roxanne Stafford. She is the managing director of the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund. And we've been talking. I'm Sarah Lomax-Reese, president and CEO of WURD. And today, this last 30 minutes, we've been talking about independent Black media, the role in the Philadelphia media ecosystem, and the unveiling, the relaunching of WURD's new livelihood initiative, which is a platform, an initiative to connecting using all of our media platforms, radio and digital and social and events and all of those things, video, to connect Philadelphians to jobs and career readiness and entrepreneurship opportunities, small business development, and all of those things to try and influence and impact a really deeply entrenched problem in the city around poverty and unemployment in the Black community. And so we are really grateful for the support from the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund for our livelihood initiative. And I really want to give a shout out to Joss Duncan and Tiffany Stannard, who are working so hard behind the scenes to make livelihood, bring livelihood to life, and to help us just navigate all of the growth that we're experiencing here at WURD. Again, big thanks to Roxanne Stafford. And next up is going to be a really powerful conversation about self-care. And so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. It's called Well and Woke. And it's a really dynamic panel of natural healing experts and all kinds of folks who are going to give us some great guidance in these kind of difficult COVID-19 days. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Stay tuned. Get your membership. We've got the special Founders Day membership rate of $80. Keep supporting WURD by listening, calling, becoming members, and just supporting our advertisers. We really appreciate your support, and shout out to my dad and my family.